T. Clark here, and this video is going to go over the personalized project reference. So the PPR, the personalized project reference, is given back to you as long as you turn it in correctly. It's given back to you on the AP exam. Your teachers will print it out for you, and you'll have it on your table as you write your response. So you want this to be as good as possible for your own reference, and also to just turn it in and have all the check marks checked. That way your code is nice and ready to go, and then when you write about it, you can just look at it and then reference your code that you did a couple weeks ago during the exam. So if I look back at the official directions, I can scroll up, official student handout, I scroll down, I'm probably wasting time right now, but you want to there's two parts. There's a procedure 1 and 2, and then the list 1 and 2. And on the website I have a link to a template, and this template is basically you can put in your screenshots before you submit them to the College Board to see if they're any good. So what I did is I always make my own functions, and then I do it myself. I did procedure 1, and I'm checking off. I said, okay, what do I need? I need to have procedure's name and return type. So I don't think I have a return type, but I do have a name. So my procedure would be would be just change point. That's my procedure. It cannot be a event handler, so it can't be a mouse press. So that's mouse press is not allowed. I'm using that in my section of my P2 area. I'll talk about that later. But for my P1, it has to be 100% my own code. So I have my own change point. In this case, I'm changing the point, one of the points in a list of a polygon points. That's my own procedure. Does it contain and use one or more parameters that have an effect on the functionality of the procedure? And then if I look, I have 4 parameters here. So again, parameters are what are in the parentheses. So these are my parameters. I have the shape, I have an index, and then an x and a y value. Now if I look, I have an if statement, a selection statement, a conditional statement. So I have one if that has one of these parameters, point index, in that if statement. So if point index was like a negative, I could say, okay, if point index is -5, then it'll never run. So I want to have a value where it is run. So when the index is valid, I guess. So like if index was 2, I would change the 3rd point in my list. And then if it was -5, excuse me, that wouldn't work because it can't have negative indices, and it would just skip this code entirely, and it would only do the else's for all of the points. So that's what that checkbox means. Contains and use one or more parameters that have an effect, and it implements an algorithm that includes sequencing, selection, and iteration. Sequencing is easy. Basically, if you have more than 2 lines of code, it's good. And if you have selection and iteration, you definitely have sequencing. So sequencing just means the code's in order, and that's good to go. Selection, if you have that if statement with a parameter, there's selection. If that's a parameter, that's a selection statement, that's a conditional. So if takes care of it. So as long as you have an if, check mark. So as the teachers are grading this over the summer, as they grade your stuff, they have basically a checkbox where they say, are there parameters? Checkbox. Oh, there's a parameter in the if statement. Check, check. And then do they have a last one is, does it have iteration? So iteration is a loop, and you can have a while loop or a for loop. So I just use the for loop, looping over the index i's in that list in this case, in my case. So I have a selection, I have iteration, and I have a parameter, and the parameter is being used in this code. So it's being used in this if statement, so I'm good to go. The second part, P2, has to show where your student developed procedure is being called. So where is it being called? So if I look at my P2, I have a mouse press. Yes, that's the mouse press, but it's being called right here on line 58, and actually on line 61 as well. So it looks like I am Oh no, I'm 61. I don't know which one I'm looking at. So change index is a different one. So 61 is when I'm changing the point. So when I write about it, because I have these line numbers in my screenshots, I would say my function that starts on line 10 called the change point, and then blah blah blah. And I would talk about oh yeah, if one of the questions would probably talk about the parameter. How does it affect the functionality? I would say the parameter point index is used on line 17 to see which index it's going to change. And then if someone provides a point index that is -5 or -20, that it would be invalid in my list, I would not do line 19, and I would skip it entirely for that one call. And then I could say, if someone provided a point index of value 2, the argument is value 2. I think that's what I did originally in my old code. But if they provide point index 2, that means when I get to index 2, I would change the values to whatever my x and y are to change that third vertex on my polygon. But again, if you notice, I said a bunch of stuff talking about specifically my code. Whenever you write about your code, you want to talk about what your code does, not just generic answers. You just specifically say my code, which changes whatever your code does. So my code just changes the shape of the thing. If you watch that video, shape of the polygon. So it has to be based on what your program is doing. Okay, the next part, lists. So it has to show where data has been stored in the list. So if I look at my L1, it starts off where I have new points equals an empty list. That's kind of dangerous right there, but I do have that new points.append, new points.append. So basically I'm making a new list. So I'm using the same code as I did in my P1 for my L1. That's fine, because my P1 or my L1 is I need to make a new list, and then I need to add points to that new points list, basically. And I would talk about that. Again, I'd be talking about specifically my code. What does my code do in this scenario? Let's see. And then the second program code shows the data in the same list being used, such as creating new data from existing data or accessing multiple elements in the list. So I always like to say accessing multiple elements in the list. And if you notice, I added the last line as well because the new points becomes the shape's points. So the shape, I'm basically updating the shape point list every time, so it gets that data. So that could be also, it gets that data. So actually I would, if I was writing about it, I'd say the shape.pointList, that's my list. And it's being changed right here with is equals. It's being updated with is equals, and it'll have a new set of values. And then in L2, I would talk about this for loop. I would write that I'm accessing every index in this shape.pointList, and then using that, I would access the actual data, the x and y data, by doing shape.online22, accessing it and just copying it over to copying the same data over, and then only the new index is what's changed. So I'm accessing the data using that for loop, and then I'm saving the data using this equals. And again, your data will be different, but do not just include the new points equals blank list. This is not good. This one line by itself is not good. You want to use the dot append, show where the dot append is, or where the equals is, or both, like I did. And then in L2, you want to show that for loop, and then where you use the bracket I if you're using indexed for loop, or where you use the singular if you're doing an enhanced for loop. So that's the PPR. Again, it's for your use when you get a printout of it from the AP exam. So make sure it looks good. Make sure you don't have any comments. Hopefully your teacher will help you with that if they notice it. Make sure the font is big, and have a good day.